Good morning and welcome to another session of OLC4O Term 1B. I'm your instructor Mike Laverty. Today is January 11th, 2023. We are on class number 27. So today is going to be our first day delving into the final unit of this course, unit number 4. So we're starting unit 4, lesson 16. Should have enough time to cover the first two assignments in Unit 4, that's assignments 40 and assignments 41. So we are in week 7 of classes in term 1B. This course is, of course, a 9-week session. So we are on week 7 of 9 weeks. And we're going to have at least a week to talk about the final exam culminating activity before we wrap things up January 26th. 2023. So that's the final day of class. After that, there'll be an admin week. And then term 2A will start. So if you're registered as a term, you'll have another week to either complete your final exam or write the culminating activity. And of course, if you're an independent learner, then that doesn't pertain to you, but still, it's important to keep in mind. So we are completed the first 3 units, and now we're on we're on unit 4, and we'll take this week 7, and parts of next week. I don't think we'll need the whole week to go over unit 4. Unit 4 does ask you to complete a literacy portfolio, so we'll spend some time on that as well. And that's 10% of your final grade. And you know it's not too bad though. You're just preparing all of the work that you've done in the course, a lot of the writing you've prepared over these weeks, and then you just kind of gather it together, give it a cover page, and do a little bit of reflection on that writing. So it's a good activity, and it kind of makes you reflect on what you've done. Hopefully, you know, if you put the work in, and I can see most of you do, or sorry, if not all of you do that, then you see the progress you've made and how far you've come, right? So it's always good to take stock of what you've done, right? So if you are watching this video on YouTube, just always be aware that participation live is an option for you from 10 a.m. to 10:55 Central Standard Time with those 4 options you see on the screen. Of course, the YouTube video is getting lots of use, so I know many of you are watching these videos on YouTube, and that's amazing. So please watch and share with other people. Many ways to submit your work, get that work to myself, to your other teachers at WASA. If you have any questions about this course, about your education in general, please send it my way. And again, that's anything, right? So there's no question too small or too large to ask, right? Just any concern you have. You know, this is your education. This is your journey. You're trying to get what you need, and that's my job, is to make sure you get there. So send me an email, add me as a friend on Facebook, give me a call either in the office, in the Sioux Lookout area, or we have a toll-free long-distance number, so call that number if you want to save yourself some money. And if you want to get in touch with me, do it 9 to 3, Monday through Friday, Central Standard Time. And that applies to everything from messenger to phone to email. That's when I'll be the most responsive. So, as I mentioned yesterday, you should have read all of Unit 1, 2, and 3. You should be starting to read ahead into Unit 4. You should have at least about 35 assignments done, and make a plan for completing assignments 35 and beyond. And if you're not there, I would just suggest getting a few assignments taken care of. It's always best to do a little bit here and there, and sometimes a student will, for their first submission, will send me as many as like 15 or 20 assignments, and that's great. And it's nice to see that someone's taken the initiative and they put the work in. But it's actually kind of better just to send in like 2 or 3, or like say like one complete lesson, 5 assignments. They're usually about 5 assignments per lesson. And then that way I can give you some feedback and it kind of point you in the right direction for next time. So there's a lot of give and take in this course. And I really like to have the opportunity to review some of your writing especially, give you some feedback, give you a couple of tools and things to watch out for, and then you make your writing better. So for today's lesson, we'll look at the images and words of the day. We'll look at today's headline, and we will delve into Unit 4, assignments 40 and 41. So you're going to review your prior knowledge of the novel Jimmy Comes Home, and we're going to make predictions about the character. So that is assignment 40. And then another part of assignment 40 is you're doing a close reading of the novel to answer questions about the novel. And then you're also doing a close reading of a biography passage before writing a summary of that passage, right? So you are taking a bunch of information and then trying to condense it down to what you think is the most important information in that passage. And you'll know you're successful if you can use your knowledge of Jimmy Comes Home to make predictions about the characters, answer questions about the novel after doing a close reading, and write a summary after doing a close reading of a biography passage. So you'll know you've been successful if you can achieve those 3 goals. Okay, so we'll jump into the images of the day. So we're talking about predictions, looking ahead. So I got a couple of cartoons up here. The first one's not really a political cartoon. It's more just like a joke. I see meetings, lots of meetings. I love the facial expression on the man. So that's when most people go to a fortune teller and they get their fortunes read, they want to hear some exciting stuff about their future, stuff they might already know. But she's just kind of telling him. This is sort of like a realistic fortune teller. He's not happy with the news, but he knows it's probably true. On the right-hand side, we've got a fortune teller tent, and it says no questions about COVID, climate change, or pending elections. And if my interpretation is correct, I believe the joke here is that nobody has the answers to those questions. They're just too hard to predict. And we can make guesses, we can make all kinds of predictions, and we have lots of data to tell us which way the wind might blow, which way things might happen, but ultimately nobody has the answers to those questions, right? They're all ultimately guesses. That's what the argument of that little cartoon is saying, right? So we've got 2 words up on the boards. The Anishinaabe-Moan word is onwachige. It's a verb, which is he or she foretells the future, prophesizes. The English word is divination. That is the practice of attempting to foretell future events or discover hidden knowledge by occult or supernatural means. From the Latin word divinus, which means godlike. You often hear the word divine, right? Deus means God in Latin, so it's a very, very similar kind of words, but it means to sort of have godlike powers, to make a prediction into the future, right? So little different meaning than making a prediction for the future, right, or foretelling the future, right? So this is keywords occult or supernatural means. So beyond what's normally expected of humans. A couple more words in the indigenous language. In Anishinaabe-Moan, we've got Batwajigan is a dream or a vision. Onwachigewin is a prophecy. English, we've got an auger. So you may have heard the word auger referred to like a drill that drills into the ice when you go ice fishing. Same spelling, but different meaning. So An augur is one of a group of ancient Roman officials charged with observing and interpreting omens for guidance in public affairs. So the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks did this too. They would have people whose job it was to interpret the future, and a lot of these people were seen as, you know, having true powers, and it was like you couldn't like defy them, and if they said to do something, then they would get listened to. Like they wouldn't go to war if the augur said you shouldn't go to war. So they were officials who would predict the future. They would use lots of means like chicken bones, chicken like intestines, like stuff like that, like throwing down pebbles, throwing down. You know, they would find some way to like toss something down the ground and then interpret the results, right? So an augury is the art or practice of an augur, divination. And the final word is conjecture. So the formation or expression of an opinion or theory without sufficient evidence or proof. So keyword without proof, right? So when someone is conjecturing, they are giving an opinion and they don't have a lot of proof. So sometimes that theory or opinion will be about the future, but they're doing it without sufficient evidence or proof. So when we do our assignment today, we're not going to be conjecturing. We're not going to use conjecture. We're going to base our predictions off evidence from the text. So here's our Globe and Mail article of the day. Future of Canadian space company Telesat uncertain as concerns rise over ability to pay off debt. So again, we've got the idea of the future, looking ahead. Things don't look good. So this is an article that if you're reading online or if you're reading an actual newspaper, you would find this in the finance section. So people who work in finance and people who work with like stock markets and investing, they're always trying to predict the future. They're always, that's basically, you know, what they do. They try to predict the future, and then it's, you know, it's very similar to gambling, where you're gambling on futures, and you know, and that's even a term you hear a lot in investing. They talk about futures. You're investing in futures, so you're trying to predict where the money's gonna go, right? So take the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, in 2019, it would have been a great idea to invest in masks and to invest in telecommunications and Zoom and Amazon and people buying stuff online. And you had that huge demand for like wood when everybody was at home doing renovations. So stuff like that, right? So that's a lot of what finance is. You're making predictions, and you have to use a lot of the evidence you have now to sort of predict what things are going to look like in the future. So we got Telesat CEO Dan Goldberg at the company's headquarters in Ottawa, September 4th, 2020. So there's our headline with all our parts of speech identified. So right here in the middle, we've got a description. We've got 3 adjectives, and they all describe this one noun. So the company's name is Telesat. Those 3 adjectives tell us what they are. And it kind of goes like in reverse order, right? So we know they're a company, but what kind of a company? Okay, they're a space company. What kind of a space company? A Canadian, right? So they're a Canadian space company. That's 3 adjectives that give us a very detailed description of what this company is. So the future is a noun. So the future of, remember, prepositions are relationship words. So they're relationship words, but they also connect ideas, right? So we're not just talking about any future. We're talking about the future of the Canadian space company Telesat. And then we have an adjective, uncertain. And that goes all the way back to this. So sometimes the adjective noun pairs are side by side. Sometimes there's about 5 or 6 words in the middle. But what's uncertain? The future. And the future of what? The future of this company. As concerns rise over ability to pay off debts. So that's got a lot of prepositions, right? 2 verbs. Right, so it's a Canadian company, and there's lots of worries about its ability to pay off its debts. Here's a breakdown of the article. There's our first 3 paragraphs in the article, and I'll just highlight a couple of things. We've got more examples of introductory phrases, right? So I want you to pay attention to introductory phrases because they're really important tools when you're a writer. So we're going to look at how this author did it. There's 2 of them, right? So there's one here. So after half a century of operation, comma. So the introductory phrase is always followed by a comma. It sets up the sentence, right? And there's another one in here. So we've got 2 of these introductory phrases, okay? The first one is after half a century of operation, comma. And then the other one is but after years of delays, comma. So the introductory phrase sort of like sets the tone. It introduces an idea. It can give a time frame. So, a lot of them can be like, during the Second World War, following the years after the Depression, until help arrived, right? So it gives you some context. So sometimes it's time related. Sometimes it could give you a location. But in this case, it's setting the tone, right? So this company's been around for 50 years, but now they're running into some troubles, okay? And then we've also got an appositive or a noun phrase contained with dashes. So remember, sometimes when you're a writer, you introduce an idea, and then you try to give more information about that. So in this case, the author has introduced a concept, and that concept is telesat. So once we hear the word telesat, they use a dash. That's right there. That's our double hyphen. And one of Canada's largest and oldest communication companies, right? And there's our second dash. And those dashes are functioning just like commas do, or sorry, brackets or commas could, right? And that way it doesn't interrupt the flow of the writing too much, so you could simply read this. After a half a century of operation, Telesat is trying to transform itself with a new constellation of satellites. But the author wants to give you additional information, and so they contain it with dashes, but they could have used commas too if they wanted to. Or they could have used brackets. You've got many ways of doing that, but you just have to contain the information somehow. Okay, so introductory phrase. There we go. We got another one. 2 years ago, Telesat hoped that by now it would be preparing to launch the first batch of its new low Earth orbit satellites designed to provide internet services to businesses and governments around the world. So again, the author has introduced a new concept. In this case, it is the LEO, low Earth orbit satellite. So if you're like me, you've never heard that term before, and if somebody says a low Earth orbit satellite, you kind of know what that is. You know it's a satellite. Its orbit is low, but like, what does that really mean? Well, here's what it means. Here's the noun phrase, right? Designed to provide internet service to businesses and governments around the world. Kind of like what Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX and having these orbiting fleets of satellites that provide internet services, right? So in this case, he could have put a dash there if he wanted to, or she could have put a dash there, but in this case, they put a comma. And if the noun phrase is ending the sentence, you don't need the other comma, the other dash. You just need to just say it, right? So again, you introduce a concept, and then you give your reader more information about it. And then finally, I have a phrase contained with commas. So meanwhile, analysts say its existing business of geostationary satellites, while still profitable, is facing stiff competition. So if I take this phrase and I read the sentence, analysts say its existing business of geostationary satellites is facing stiff competition. So again, it's that similar concept where you're giving the reader additional information where I can make sense of this sentence without having that, but it's nice to know it, right? So they could put commas here. They could put the dashes here, but they've chosen commas, and it's just giving you more information. So while they're still making money off their old satellites, they're facing stiff competition. So that's... And then one other thing I noticed by doing a close reading of this author's, of this writing, I noticed that they started a sentence with the word but 3 times. Right there, and right there. When I was a kid, a young student in elementary school, I was given all kinds of rules. I was often told you could never start a sentence with the word but. You could never use the word and twice in a sentence. There's all kinds of rules that sometimes a teacher will give you, and then you kind of cling to them for the rest of your life. But clearly, they're not rules, and this is an article published in one of Canada's most widely read newspaper. So it does work, but it's certainly this writer's style, right? So, and that's typically what they're doing. And then, you know, as a writer, you're always storytelling, right? And you're not just giving somebody information, you're kind of telling a story. So the way this author has chosen to tell a story, so it might not be the most exciting story or the most like gripping story, but it's still a story, and it's a story about this company. And that's what a lot of storytelling is. Like, you know, here's your main character. They've got a lot of good things going for them, but they've got this problem over here, and they've got to figure it out. Well, they've got their best friend, and them and their best friend are trying to solve the problem, but there's something in the way. There's a villain who's trying to, you know, so that's typically how we tell a story. There's conflict. So the story with this company is like many things are going well for this company, but they're having lots of problems too, right? So they're at a crossroads, right? They've got a lot of stuff going on. They've got a ton of satellites in the sky. They're a really powerful company, but they've got some problems, and they may not be around in the future if they can't figure out those problems. So that leads us to our first assignment in Unit 4, the characters. So complete items 1 and 2 before reading the final 3 chapters of your novel. Okay, so the final 3 chapters of Jimmy Comes Home would be Chapter 10, Jimmy's Struggle, Chapter 11, The Dream, and Chapter 12, A New Direction. So you need to complete these items before you read the final chapters, because you are making predictions about those final 3 chapters. What's going to happen to our characters? So you can't read the book and then make your predictions because you know what's going to happen. So make sure you haven't read the last 3 chapters. And then maybe if you have, maybe predict beyond the last page of the novel. So, all right, so take a moment to access your prior knowledge of the characters in the novel, and then write a few words to describe what you know about those characters already. So I'm going to do an example, and so I'm not going to give you the answers, but I'm going to give you a framework for answering this question, okay? So and I'm going to use some background from creative writing. So when you write a novel, when you write a short story, or if you write a screenplay and you have a character, what you do is you write a character study or a character profile, and then you want to understand aspects about that character. So if the question says, what do we know about Jimmy, then we can answer some, and I might divide this up into like two different categories, okay? So I'm just gonna do some basic info, okay? This is the easy stuff to understand, okay? So we can say things like somebody's age, right? How old are they? Their gender. Are they male, female? Do they identify as something else? Age, gender, ethnicity, their culture, where they live, their family situation, things like their closest connections, right? Let's go with their appearance. What do they look like? Do we have any clues besides the cover of the book what this guy looks like? So age, gender, ethnicity, culture, where they live, family, closest connections, appearance. Well, let's go with personality. What are they like? How do they act? And then maybe, yeah, so that's sort of like the basic info. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to write down some of the harder questions. And I'm just trying to see how I could phrase that. Maybe we'll just see like some deeper traits or information, right? Now, so this is I'm going to phrase these as questions, and the answer to the question would be a detail about that person, what you know about them. Probably the most important question is what do they want? That's probably the most important question you can ask about a character in a novel, in a short story, is what does this character want? And what do they want right now? What do they want in the future? So that's that's a deeper question you can ask about somebody. What do they want? What do they fear? What do they love? Okay? If you're doing some soul searching about your own life, and you're up at 3 in the morning and you're having one of those I got to figure everything out moments, and this is what you would ask yourself, right? What do I want? Fear and love are probably the two most powerful human emotions we have, right? So what do you fear in life? What do you love about life, right? So these are like the deeper questions about Jimmy. What does he want? What does he fear? What does he love? And then, who? And then who is he to others, right? So these are some deep questions, right? So everything on the left-hand side of the page is sort of like superficial in a sense, and they're sort of like fixed, like age, your gender, your ethnicity, your culture, where you're from, who's in your family, who your closest connections are, what you look like, what your personality is, right? And then on the right, you have these deeper questions that they're about you, but they're also like deeper questions, and they're like how you fit into the community, right? So when we go back to this question, and it says, take a moment to access your knowledge of characters in the novel. Write a few words to describe what you know about these characters already. And if you look at the assignment, you've got 6 characters to talk about. the assignment's only worth 6 marks, so you don't need to hit on everything on this page, okay? That's unrealistic, but just that's what I want to see. Let's talk about Peter. I don't think it actually says how old Peter is, but how old is Peter? And then, like this is going to be like the main characters. It'll be easy to answer these questions, right? And then for all characters, you'll be able to answer the basic info. But, this is the information I want to see for that question, right? So just the basic info. And if you can, go into the deeper stuff, like what they want, what they fear, what they love, and who they are to other people. And then we could do the same thing for Martha, like just for example, like her age. And then you can just kind of, you can just guess, like 60 plus. I don't know. Senior citizen, maybe. I don't know. If we did a close reading of the novel, we may get some hints on how old she is. Obviously loves Jimmy. I would say that she absolutely fears losing him. Right? So that's kind of like her motivation, right? This is what we know about her. So that's a couple of things we know about her. Second part of the question is, beside each character's name, you're going to write point form notes to show predictions about what you think will happen to each character listed. So here's an important caveat, a little warning. Try to base your predictions on what you already know about the characters, right? So when you make your prediction, you're going back to this, right? So I know this about the character, and I'm going to base this on, I'm going to base my predictions based off of what I know about that person, right? So if you had somebody in your life, for example, that say you were worried about, you would be doing stuff like this. You'd be using those questions like, I know this about them. I know this is true about their life right now, and therefore I'm kind of worried about them. Or if you've got high hopes for them, then it's it's based off your prediction. So don't just make wild predictions. Don't make predictions for the sake of making predictions. Tell me what is most likely to happen to them in the next chapters based on what you already know about them, right? So we've got Jimmy, Teresa, we've got Gary, and we've got Peter, Miss Quintel, and Martha, okay? So the novel is called Jimmy Comes Home. So making predictions about Jimmy is going to be the easiest because we have the most material to work from, okay? So like all great books and all great novels, there's always like a question that's in the back of your mind when you're reading Jimmy Comes Home. And I would argue that, like when most people are reading this book, Jimmy Comes Home, the question you're constantly asking yourself is he going to change his life? Is Jimmy going to find the strength to overcome his past and stay out of jail? And is this kid going to chart a path into the future where he's not going to jail, he's not addicted to drugs or alcohol, where he can have a relationship with his son, he can connect with his community and his family, right? So is Jimmy going to do all those things, right? So that's a prediction, right? So, I'll phrase them as question. What is his future? You've got his connection to Teresa and Chance, his son, and his friend Gary, right? So that's kind of easy to do, right? So Teresa, again, we don't learn too much about Teresa throughout the course of the novel, but if you go back to this model, so if we look at this page again, and I ask myself about Teresa, you know, what does Teresa want? I think she wants a connection with Jimmy. I think she also fears losing Jimmy. And she definitely, I'm not sure if she loves Jimmy, but she definitely loves her son. And who is she to others? Well, she is the mother of Jimmy's son, right? So that's, when we go back to making our predictions about Teresa, and we could ask, like, will she connect with Jimmy? Gary, similar question. Gary's got that dark path in life. Will he leave it? Will that dark path, will it end him? Things are pretty drastic for him, right? So that's how we're making predictions, right? So, and then you want to get as specific as possible, okay? Yeah. Make a specific prediction. So it's really important to note that I'm not grading you on your ability to make an accurate prediction. So it's not like if you make a prediction and that doesn't happen in chapter 11, you don't get the question right. I'm grading you on your ability to just formulate a question about the future. Sorry, formulate a prediction about the future. So if the question is, will Teresa connect with Jimmy? You could make a prediction that says, Teresa will not make a solid connection with Jimmy as he continues to, slide down the dark side of his life, right? So, and then basically, do you think are we gonna get a happy ending at the end of this novel? Are we gonna get a kind of mixed ending? This is book 1. Right? So this isn't the end of the story, right? So sometimes, especially in a book series, you don't always get like a happy ending. You sort of get like a mixed ending, or you get a really sad ending. And then maybe books 2 and 3 will kind of wrap things up. But, what's going to happen? I predict that Gary will find a better path in life by entering a substance abuse program, or, that's a specific prediction. I predict that Jimmy will become more involved in Chance's life and help out with raising him, right? So that's a prediction you could make. Whether or not that actually happens is not really important. It's just based upon what you've read before, what will happen. Based upon what we read before, you could say maybe Peter, so, and then again, like, you have to say, like, what do we know about Peter? We know he's involved with Jimmy. He's a positive influence on Jimmy. So these are the things I know about Peter. I would say the same goes for Mrs. Quintel, right? She's involved with Jimmy. Positive influence, but I would say there's a bit of a confrontation, or a bit of let's see, yeah, it's a bit of confrontation with Jimmy, where I think Peter and Jimmy tend to just get along, and Jimmy respects Peter and wants to be like Peter and wants to be with Peter, and is like, he's like really pumped up when like Peter wants to do stuff with him. Whereas I don't think he really respects Mrs. Quintel on that level, but she is involved in his life, and I would argue that she is a positive influence on him. But there's a bit of confrontation between them. there is a bit of antagonism. So an antagonist is someone who is sort of like counter to the main character. Your protagonist is your main character. So an antagonist is someone who's like not necessarily like the villain of the story, but they're sort of like they're countering the main character. And if somebody's on a dark path in life, anybody who's trying to rescue them from that dark path will be kind of like seen as like a villain or like a negative force in that person's life, even though they're trying to make them positive, right? So with all these three characters, they're all sort of like influences in Jimmy's life. I would say positive influences. So make predictions. So how, you could make lots of predictions like how will these three characters influence Jimmy's life in the next 3 chapters. Okay, so part 3 of assignment 40 is list the important events that Peter tells Mrs. Quintel about Jimmy's past in point form. Okay, so this is where, I'm not going to give you the answers, but you have to go into the novel and then find this information by doing a close reading. And this is where you might want to use your scanning technique. And the scanning technique is where you flip to a chapter and then you just scan for the key word. In this case, it'd be Peter, right? If you had a digital version of the document, you could do a Control F. So on your keyboard, you hold down the Control button, hit the word F, letter F, and then you can search for every time Peter comes up in this book, right? So, and like, if you had to write an essay about this book and it was like character based, and you want to know everything about Peter, you would have to do a close reading, and so you got to find the passage where Peter is talking to Mrs. Quintel. And what are the important events in point form? Why does Peter think it's a good idea for Jimmy to participate in the healing circle? What does Jimmy think about it? Again, this is just find that chapter, find the part where Peter is advocating that Jimmy take the healing circle, and then just tell us what Jimmy thinks about it. So you can quote or you can cite the text if you want, or you can just paraphrase it. But if you can, use the page numbers, right? So when we quote or we cite the text, then we're using quotation marks, and it's like, Jimmy, felt bad. I don't know, I'm just making that up, but that's from page 7. So if we quote the text, if you're using the words as they're written in the book, put them in quotation marks, go back to our lessons on quoting and citing text to do it properly. Or you can paraphrase it. And when you paraphrase something, that means you're putting it into your own words. But when you're doing an English assignment or a history assignment, for example, and you're getting information from somewhere else, you have to cite it. You have to say, like, okay, so whenever possible, I want you to use those page numbers, okay? Show me that you've read the book and you've done the work and you've gone to the page where that comes up. So you have 2 options. 1, quote it directly. Option 2, paraphrase it. But both options require you to put the page number in. So was your prediction for Gary accurate? Explain what you thought would happen and what actually did happen in the novel. Include your reaction to what happened in the novel. Were you surprised, upset, or did you know it would happen? So that's easy, right? So you make a prediction about Gary. and then you read the last 3 chapters, and then just report back to us. Were you right? Were you wrong? What's your reaction? On page 77 of the novel, Mrs. Kittel shares something about her own personal life with Jimmy. What does she share, and why do you think she did that? That's pretty straightforward. Complex relationships run throughout this novel. Choose one relationship in Jimmy Comes Home and comment on how or why it is complex. Make sure you name the people in the relationship. Jimmy and Mrs. Kittel, Jimmy and Teresa. Decide whether it is a good relationship or a bad one, and use examples from the text to back up your opinion. So, let's look at that word complex, okay? So, in your life, you have many, many relationships with people. And some of those relationships are pretty straightforward. So I would say the less time you spend with someone, probably the more straightforward your reaction is or relationship is with them. So like acquaintances, people you see at work that you don't really interact with that much. It's a pretty straightforward relationships. But a relationship becomes complex when there's conflict, okay? And conflict is everything in a story, right? So every good story has to have conflict. So it's a conflict between 2 people or a group of people. So let's take Jimmy and Gary, for example, right? I think with Jimmy and Gary, the conflict is pretty apparent, right? And a conflict often comes down to you know, it's what you want kind of versus what I want, right? And so if you think about a husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, father and son, mother and daughter, right? A lot of conflict is what I want versus what you want, versus what we want, right? That's the heart of conflict, right? What things do we want together? What things do you want on your own? What things do I want on my own? How do you and I figure out what that is, right? So Gary wants to do a lot of bad stuff with Jimmy. He wants to get drugs in Thompson. He wants to be like a gangster. He wants to make tons of money and live wildly and be reckless and drive a skidoo on the ice, right? And he wants Jimmy to be involved in him, right? So, and then Jimmy is like trying to find the right path in life. That's what he wants. So, what do the 2 people want together? That's conflict, right? And that's what makes relationships complex, is this right here. If 2 characters want the exact same thing and they just go out there and get it, there's no conflict, it's boring, there's no story, there's no drama, right? So every great movie, think of any movie, think of any TV show you've loved, any movie you've loved, any great book you've ever written. There's always conflict and complex relationships. That's what makes them interesting to read. So you've just finished reading the book 1. What did you think about it? Give it a rating from 1 to 10. 1, you didn't like it. 10, you loved it. And then give 3 reasons for why you said that. So that's also pretty straightforward. All right, last 5 minutes, we'll touch upon this, okay? So what you're doing here is you're reading a short piece about the author of the book, Robert Checkwich. And we're going to highlight some important things, okay? So we're going to write a 1-paragraph summary of the biography you have read. Your paragraph will have at least 5 or 6 sentences and contain the main idea of the article with some supporting details. Your audience is an adult interested in reading about the novel. Sorry, they're interested in reading about the author of the novel. And for this, you're submitting a rough copy and a final copy. So you should do the following. Use the reading strategies to identify and highlight the main ideas and details in the text. use the checklist and rubric provided, hand in your rough draft, revise your work, prepare a final copy for your portfolio. Okay, so that's going to be in your portfolio. So, and then we'll touch upon that portfolio in greater detail. So we'll talk about the. I think what we'll do is we'll just kind of set this up, and then we'll do a proper reading of this tomorrow. So the review summary. Have I clearly stated the main idea? Right. That's probably the most important thing when you're creating a summary, right? You have to get down to the main idea. So why. Why was this written in the first place, right? Have I included at least 2 supporting details needed to understand the main idea? Do the details clearly relate to the main idea? Are my sentences in an order that makes sense? Have I written a closing sentence that reminds the reader of what has been written? Have I used my own words? Okay, so that's a really important concept, okay? So, and I think that'll be great. So tomorrow we can come back to this and we can spend some time. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time on this concept of paraphrasing, right? Now, this is a technique that a lot of writers use. So you're taking somebody else's words and you're turning them into your own words. So it can be tricky, and again, you're not passing this off as your own work. You're not saying this is my biography of Robert Checkwich. What you're doing is you're taking a long passage and turning it into a shorter passage, right? So you're turning the author's words into your words, and you're also taking a lot of words and you're reducing the amount of words. So there's going to be some details in the original that don't make their way to yours, because if you included every detail, then your writing would be the same length, right? So when you paraphrase, you are making decisions about the text and you're deciding what's important, right? So when we paraphrase, we're typically shortening and we're selecting. So let's just do a quick one right here. So Robert Checkwich spent several years as a language